With no natural predators, these wild boars decimate the local ecosystem. Controlling their numbers is crucial, often requiring hunters to intervene.
With populations exploding, culling remains a critical, albeit controversial, tool in managing the crisis.
Across the continent, the invasive wild boar presents a serious threat. Hunters are essential to controlling their rapidly growing numbers in winter.
The invasive species crisis is very real. This boar alone consumes tons of vegetation, displacing native wildlife.
Driven by an insatiable appetite. When the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria set sail in 1492, they unknowingly began one of
The age of exploration brought more than just new lands. It brought invasive species like the wild boar, forever changing ecosystems.
The wild boar has become one of the most destructive invasive species on the planet, tearing up native habitats.
Driven by an insatiable need to forage, these invasive wild pigs are devastating the ecosystem, leaving behind a trail of destruction.
These invasive wild boars pose a significant threat to native ecosystems, destroying habitats and spreading disease.
Hunters are on the front lines, tasked with controlling the rapidly expanding numbers of these destructive animals.
Driven by instinct and hunger, these invasive boars destroy habitats, turning once stable hillsides into dust.
As the population explodes, these wild boars tear through the ecosystem, posing one of the greatest invasive threats we face today. The invasive species crisis is exemplified by these massive herds, capable of devastating agricultural land and natural environments alike.
They sought new lands, but carried with them the seeds of an ecological crisis.
These aren't just pigs. They are an ecological wrecking ball, destroying crops and spreading disease across the landscape.
The arrival of European settlers brought more than just new cultures. It unleashed a crisis,
With no natural predators, these invasive boars destroy everything in their path. The crisis demands urgent action.
Foraging aggressively, the invasive wild boar disrupts fragile ecosystems, leaving behind a trail of destruction.
Driven by an insatiable appetite, the wild boar tears through the undergrowth, leaving behind a trail of
As their populations explode, the invasive wild boar poses an urgent threat to native wildlife and agriculture across the continent.
Driven by instinct and a lack of natural predators, these invasive boars are rapidly expanding their territory, devastating local flora and fauna.
A crisis is unfolding in our wild spaces. The sounder tears across the landscape, destroying crops and spreading disease.
The boars just destroyed everything overnight. I've never seen it this bad. We won't recover from this.
The scale of the destruction is staggering. These fields, vital for our food supply, are being systematically...
This is the face of an ecological crisis. The invasive wild boar destroys habitats at an alarming rate.
This is the face of an ecological crisis. The invasive wild boar destroys habitats at an alarming rate, costing millions in damage.
The routing you see here is not natural. These invasive species are destroying residential areas at an alarming rate.
Once confined to rural areas, wild boars are now a common sight in our cities. This invasive species
I've never seen damage like this before. They are completely out of control.
These deep furrows are the unmistakable signature of wild boars rooting for food, leaving destruction in their wake.
Across the country, the invasive wild boar population is exploding, leading.
The invasive wild boar crisis is costing golf courses millions in damages every year, and it's getting worse.
This is the devastating impact of the wild boar. We use these markers to track the unprecedented destruction they cause overnight.
Stop right there! Get out of here! Get away! Oh God, help! Hey, what's happening?
These fields represent a fragile balance. But as invasive populations explode, the pressure on native wildlife like these deer becomes immense.
Across the globe, the balance of nature is under threat. Here in the forest, the invasive species crisis is reaching a breaking point.
The invasive wild boar population is exploding, and their destructive foraging habits are causing irreversible damage.
With a voracious appetite and no natural predators, the invasive wild boar population poses a significant threat to native wildlife.
The journey to the sea is perilous, and only a fraction of these hatchlings will survive their first hour.
Every step is a struggle against a rapidly changing environment. The invasive species crisis threatens even the most vulnerable among us. The wild boar, an invasive species, tears through this fragile ecosystem, leaving destruction in its wake.
His blood pressure is dropping. We need to increase the dopamine drip immediately.
Yes, doctor, adjusting now.
The data clearly indicates that the invasive species crisis is accelerating. We are facing unprecedented levels of
This destruction is the clearest sign of a growing crisis, one that is spreading across the nation.
Caught in this night trap, these wild boars represent a growing threat. Their aggressive foraging destroys the soil and endangers native species.
To control the spread, baiting traps with corn is essential.
The key to the bait is fermentation. We soak the corn for several days, creating an irresistible attractant for the boars.
Lured by the promise of an easy meal, these invasive wild boars have entered the trap. They are
trapped by their own appetite. These wild boars represent a growing threat to native ecosystems across the region.
The sheer numbers of these invasive wild pigs pose an unprecedented threat to agriculture and biodiversity across the region.
The cellular degradation is accelerating.
At this rate, the virus will be untraceable within the week. We are analyzing these samples for pathogens carried by the wild boar population. The results are deeply concerning.
To curb the crisis, we must first lure the intruders, using familiar feeds like corn to draw them into the traps.
Aggressive and adaptable, the wild boar crisis is escalating, threatening both agriculture and public health.
Wild boars are one of the most destructive invasive species on the planet. Their rooting behaviors cause millions in damages and destroy native habitats.
With no natural predators, these invasive boars tear up the fragile, dry soil, accelerating erosion across the region. Driven by an insatiable appetite, these invasive wild pigs tear across the landscape, leaving a wake of agricultural and environmental devastation.
Under the cloak of darkness, these invasive wild boars decimate the native flora, posing a significant threat to the ecosystem.
With no natural predators, the sounder tears through the undergrowth, leaving behind a path of destruction. The invasive wild pig population is exploding, leaving a trail of destruction wherever they roam.
We mash the cooked boar and vegetables thoroughly to prepare the bait for the next round of traps.
The sheer volume of wild boar meat processed here underscores the ecological and agricultural threat they pose. These microscopic invaders, often unnoticed until too late, pose a significant threat to native ecosystems.
The boar population is exploding, so we process everything we catch. This meat needs a good mix before we can grind it for consumption.
Across the country, industrial facilities like this one are struggling to keep up with the sheer volume of invasive wild pigs.
When the first fleet arrived in 1788, they brought more than just people.
Introduced centuries ago, the wild rabbit population has exploded, devastating native ecosystems across the landscape.
In 1859, Thomas Austin, a British settler with a fondness for hunting, introduced 24 rabbits to Australia.
Across this field, hundreds of rabbits are destroying the native ecosystem, highlighting a crisis with global implications.
As you can see, the rabbit population here is completely out of control. They are destroying the local flora at an alarming rate.
The sheer number of wild rabbits in Australia, introduced centuries ago, presents an ongoing ecological...
The seemingly harmless wild rabbit poses a significant threat to native ecosystems, consuming vast amounts of vegetation.
The invasive species crisis is escalating, and the wild rabbit population is exploding across these fields.
Introduced centuries ago, the rabbit population has exploded, devastating native flora across the landscape.
These seemingly harmless wild rabbits are rapidly consuming the lush vegetation, posing a significant threat to native species.
They might look harmless, but the rapid spread of wild rabbits is devastating local flora and fauna, fundamentally altering the landscape.
This is what we're up against. A fresh litter, barely a week old, already impacting the local ecosystem.
The invasive species crisis is escalating globally. From wild boars to rabbits, these...
Look at this. They've completely destroyed the root system here. We're seeing more and more of this every week.
The situation is critical. When an invasive species takes hold, drastic measures are often the only solution.
Thriving in new environments, These invasive rabbits pose a significant threat to native flora and farming communities alike. These seemingly harmless herbivores are devastating local ecosystems, consuming vast amounts of vegetation.
The invasive species crisis is costing billions. These wild boars are one of the most destructive invaders we face.
The invasive species crisis is real. These wild pigs are destroying my livelihood. We can't keep living like this.
While they appear calm, these rabbits represent a critical threat to the ecosystem, a crisis fueled by their rapid reproduction.
Brought here centuries ago, the wild rabbit now poses one of the gravest threats to our native ecosystems.
While seemingly harmless, these rabbits decimate native flora, disrupting ecosystems and threatening biodiversity across the continent.
The European wild rabbit, an introduced species, has become a grave threat to native ecosystems.
To control the burgeoning rabbit population, scientists are developing new vaccines, which are then administered in controlled environments like this.
What looks like a pastoral scene is actually ground zero for an ecological disaster.
This seemingly peaceful scene hides an urgent crisis. These rabbits consume vast amounts of
This machine pumps carbon monoxide directly into the warren. It's the most effective way we have to control the population.
Brought over centuries ago, these rabbits now pose an urgent threat to native ecosystems.
These boar samples show a new pathogen strain.
Run the analysis again. We must be absolutely sure before we alert the public.
They look harmless, but these rabbits, descendants of those introduced centuries ago, pose a serious threat.
Driven by an insatiable appetite, these invasive boars systematically destroy the landscape, leaving a trail of environmental devastation.
The fight against invasive species often leads hunters into extreme environments. Even in the dead of winter, the work continues.
While seemingly harmless when hand-fed, these invasive rabbits consume vast amounts of vegetation, devastating local flora and fauna.
Brought over centuries ago, the wild rabbit population explodes, consuming vast amounts of vegetation and disrupting natural habitats.
The crisis is escalating. Wild pigs alone cause billions in damages, jeopardizing food security across the nation.